When this scene was shot, it was done entirely in secret. Hello, and welcome to the 33rd installment of Frasier Fridays, where all the salads are tossed and all the eggs are scrambled. Today, we're looking at the 9th episode of Season 2, entitled Adventures in Paradise, Part 2. It originally aired on November 22nd, 1994, and attracted 24.2 million viewers, a climb of almost 2.5 million from the prior week, and a good enough rating to be the second highest rated episode of the season. Both Friends and Seinfeld are off this week and next week due to the Thanksgiving holiday. Interestingly, Frasier doesn't take either week off, although it will take the first week of December off. As we talked about during part 1 of this episode, we have James Burrows on direction this week, and Ken Levine and David Isaacs on writing duty. I don't want to rehash the same info I covered in my review for part 1, so make sure to check that out for more details about our love interest this week, as well as details that are the same for both episodes here. Moving into the episode, I was right that we're not getting a new intro this week. I just wasn't right about what it was. This week we see the return of the fireworks over the city. This intro first showed up in the pilot episode of this season, and is tied with the red blinking dot on top of the Space Needle for 2 appearances each thus far this season. Since this week is our first 2-parter, we're starting out with a recap from last week. We see a title card letting us know that we're in for a recap this week. But as opposed to a traditional previously on segment, we get some new voiceover from Grammer here, letting us know that this is what happened last week. It's short, sweet, and does exactly what it needs to catch us up for this week's episode. On Cheers, during the cliffhanger between the Season 1 finale and the Season 2 premiere, we had a voiceover from Cliff Clavin where he discussed his vacation and then, as an aside, mentioned what had been going on back in the bar. That previously on stands out as probably my all-time favorite catch-up for viewers, because it was so in character for Cliff, and just a great use of a fourth wall break. With that said, I don't think something like that would work with Frasier. And if just a little title card is what we get on 2-parters going forward, that's probably the proper way to deal with it for this show. Moving to the episode, we pick up exactly where we left off last week, with Frasier and Lilith discovering they are neighbors in Bora Bora. Frasier is civilized at first and asks Lilith if she's there with anyone. In an uncharacteristically joking line from Lilith, she says she's there with Sam Malone, aka Ted Danson's character from Cheers. As someone who watched all of Cheers, I audibly gasped when she said this line, even though it turned out to be a joke a few seconds later. While we're on the topic of Lilith, I feel the need to point out her very interesting choice in wardrobe here. Lilith was always shown as a practical dresser during her run on Cheers, and we rarely saw her wearing heels. To go with Lilith's new personality, we've got her wearing massive heels during this scene. I find this a strange costume choice, as it doesn't really go with her outfit, but a nice addition for her new outlook on life. As Frasier is introducing Madeline to Lilith, Lilith's new boyfriend Brian shows up. Brian is played by James Morrison, not to be confused with the singer of The Doors. Morrison is a shockingly A-list actor for such a small part here. I'm not sure where the plotline with him and Lilith at the end of this episode will go, but it's worth noting that this is his only appearance on the show. At this point in his career, Morrison had been active in Hollywood for about 10 years, and had already made numerous TV appearances, including spots on North and South, Werewolf, Walker, Texas Ranger, Doogie Howser, MD, and Quantum Leap. Post this appearance, he landed a starring role in the short-lived Space Above and Beyond, and recurring roles in 24 and Twin Peaks The Return. He's also appeared in 1 or 2 offs in a ton of television shows, including Castle, NCIS, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, 6 Feet Under, and Law & Order, SVU. In addition to his acting career, Morrison, following the footsteps of fellow James Morrison, released 2 different singer-songwriter CDs, and for the last 10 years has been teaching a yoga course. He's an interesting actor that is still active today, and one who, despite being a genuine star, has quite a few other interests and contributions to society. Levine and Isaacs are spot on with their jokes this week, delivering another really clever punny one as the competition between the two couples heats up. Lilith mentions that her new beau is a seismologist, and Frasier says that's perfect since Lilith has so many faults. This earns an audible laugh from Lilith, as Frasier notes this is quite a departure of her character of the Ice Queen we've known in previous appearances. This, coupled with the extravagant heels and flower in her hair, show we have a truly new and transformed Lilith here. Considering how little we saw her change during her years on Cheers, I find her changes here, after dating Brian for so short a time, to be interesting, and a highlight of just how different the seismologist versus Frasier's personality is. As we transition further into the vacation, Frasier struggles to listen to the sounds coming from Lilith's room next door, while he should be enjoying his time with Madeline. She gets upset with him and wants him to concentrate on her, instead of listening next door. And Frasier says this isn't like college, when those things were happening next door and he was left to concentrate on his Henry Miller collection. This is an interesting comment for Frasier to make, as I wouldn't have pegged him as a Henry Miller fan. Miller was a really controversial writer at the time he began his career, and as late as 1961, most of his work was banned in the United States. Miller's writing was a really strange style that was sort of a stream of consciousness, but full of all kinds of explicit material and philosophy. The best I can compare him to is Hunter S. Thompson, but a bit more philosophical. Given what Frasier's past interests are, and everything we know about him, Miller feels like a guilty pleasure for him, and not something he'd routinely talk about. So maybe this line is him showing some vulnerability to Madeline. The scene and the vacation end with Frasier performing for, well, it turns out just for himself, as he apparently causes a lot of damage to the bed in his attempt to make Lilith jealous. It's a funny scene and completely ridiculous, but it doesn't seem like Frasier caused that much damage to the bed, which directly contradicts what we hear in the next scene. In any event, I find the most shocking thing in this scene to be Madeline, who is so offended by Frasier's behavior here that she just immediately leaves. This is where the rest of the episode surprised me. With last week's ending, I was expecting we'd have this entire episode take place in the paradise of Bora Bora, and from there we'd see a lot more of Frasier and Lilith bouncing off each other as they try to juggle their past with their current relationships. That's not at all what we get here. Instead, we get to see the aftermath of Frasier's bad behavior, as he tries to pick up the pieces of what his jealousy did with his potential relationship with Madeline. Not only did this surprise me, as it wasn't where I expected the story to go, it also really disappointed me initially, as it felt like a huge waste of Lilith to have her leave before the 7-minute mark. But fear not, despite Lilith's absence this early in the episode, we get a really great and surprising guest caller, with one of my favorite 80s and 90s actors, Kevin Bacon. Bacon is a bona fide movie star, who started acting with a role in the 1978 comedy classic Animal House. From there he found pretty regular work, including a role in the original Friday the 13th, and an 11-episode stint on Guiding Light, before really breaking big in 1984 with Footloose. From there it's been pretty much all movie star roles for Bacon. Interestingly, after Bacon broke big, Frasier is the first TV role he did, and only his second credited TV spot after his 11 episodes on Guiding Light. Other notable spots on Kevin Bacon's resume include the excellent sci-fi horror comedy Tremors, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Wild Things, which is my recommendation for the week. The movie looks completely trashy, and it is, but it's also far better and smarter than it has any right to be. For me, it falls somewhere between a guilty pleasure and a movie I just really like. As TV became more prestigious, Bacon has started to show up in TV shows here and there, including 2 episodes of Will and Grace, an episode of Robot Chicken, and starring roles in both The Following, which was pretty good for the first few seasons, and City on a Hill. Bacon is still very active today, and has well over 100 screen roles credited to his name. He's also done a little bit of direction, most notably with the 2005 film Loverboy, which was not particularly well received. Bacon is a solid actor and a really cool guest caller, especially considering that this is really his first TV appearance after he became a star. While Bacon's character is on the phone, Frasier gets a call from Madeline, who is giving him a second chance, and quickly dumps the Bacon conversation on Roz. It's not a secret that producers sometimes talk on the show, but with that said, we've never seen Roz talking on the show before, at least while the broadcasting is live. This is something that could be used really effectively in the future, and something I wouldn't mind seeing more of, although I'm not sure Frasier's ego would really allow for it. There's not really a B-plot this episode, but there is a B-conversation involving the opera, which results in some nice back and forth between Niles and Daphne. I'm really liking that there's more going on between them than just Niles lusting after her this season, and it's really nice character growth for both of them. One other thing of note involving Daphne is she's got another new hairstyle this week. I haven't been making too much of a big deal out of these, but her hair has been a lot more adventurous this second season, and had a lot more varying styles than it did during the first season. It's interesting that Daphne's look is changing quite a bit here, while everyone else is remaining pretty static week to week. We get a pretty good Eddie joke that's surprisingly dirty, when Eddie decides to crash Frasier's 1 second chance with Madeline. I actually really like the chemistry between Frasier and Jo Beth Williams' character, and I almost think it's a shame that they didn't get more time to bounce off each other in the series. Daphne and Niles' relationship isn't the only one evolving from season 1 here. Last season we had a joke involving Frasier throwing Eddie off the balcony. This season we get another one, but it's much less blatant, and despite Frasier rolling his eyes, you can tell he's actually starting to like Eddie. We've seen a bit of this before when Frasier and Eddie hang out alone. I'm not saying we're ever going to see Frasier actually admit he likes Eddie to anyone, but as the viewers, it's pretty clear there's more than a little fondness here, and this is a nice showing of it. My horrible concerns that Lilith Sternum was wasted this week are alleviated as she shows up at Frasier's apartment to ruin his second chance with Madeline. In hindsight, this was obviously where this episode was going, but I'm going to admit it caught me off guard. For whatever reason, when they left Bora Bora, I just figured that was it for our Lilith outing this week. The really clever lines and surprisingly biting new Lilith continue, as she makes a joke involving her and Madeline's layovers. Frasier has always had some good comments like this, but this week Levine and Isaacs are on top of their game, and it makes me wish they would have stuck around for a few more episodes than they do. Kelsey Grammer chews this scene like a madman when he realizes Lilith is the one there now instead of Madeline, and it's fantastic. David Hyde Pierce has typically had the most scene-chewing reactions, which I think is in large part because of his theatrical background, but this week's outing gives that honor to Grammer beyond a doubt. This over-the-top reaction is one of Grammer's best, and Lilith's calm response is just perfect, and showcases why the two work so well together on Cheers. It turns out Lilith came back to ask for Frasier's blessing, as she's decided to marry Brian. I like that she's asking for Frasier's blessing after the marriage they shared, but I do have to wonder if she's actually getting married, as Morrison will not appear on the show again, while we know Lilith has another 9 appearances left in her. It'll be interesting to see how Lilith's life as a recurring character turns out during the remainder of the series. The rest of the Cranes return from the opera, just as Frasier is giving Lilith his blessing, and their reactions are just as much fun as Frasier's were. Barton almost collapses against Niles as he stumbles back so hard, and in direct contrast with what I noted about Niles chewing the scenery earlier, we have a more subtle but just as horrified reaction from Niles here. Martin hands down has the best joke of the episode here, where he rushes over to congratulate Lilith on marrying someone that isn't his son. The line and the reaction are just hilarious. And if I'm not mistaken, both Newworth and Grammer appear to actually be holding back laughter here, while Martin runs across the room to offer his congratulations. Our final scene, with Frasier's return trip to Bora Bora, is the perfect way to wrap up the episode, and possibly the most interesting one from a creative standpoint. We open the scene with the return of the vacation house, which is, I'm sure, the reason why we don't have a Cafe Nervosa scene this week, or last week. And we have pretty much a reenactment of the end of the prior episode. Except this time with Frasier turning to find Shelley Long's Diane, his ex-fiancée from Cheers, in the hut next door. This turns out to be a dream and is an extremely short appearance from Long. I know Long will show up in at least one more episode, and I think we'll save talking about her film history until then, since this is really just a cameo. But I do want to talk about how this cameo came to be. Long's appearance here was actually kept secret from nearly the entire cast and crew and the NBC executives. When this scene was shot, it was done entirely in secret, and when the rest of the scene was shot, Frasier's reaction was just what the coda shows, with Niles being there instead. When the episode was delivered to the executives to look over, this bit with Shelley Long wasn't even included in it. On the scheduled air day, those in the know said there was something wrong that needed fixed, and the full version needed to be aired instead. Most of the employees at NBC then learned about Long's appearance, as it was aired for the general public. There's not much to note with the coda this week. It's just a continuation of the prior scene's joke. It works fine, and given we'd already wrapped everything else up, I'm not really sure what else could have been done, except maybe to see something funny with Daphne pretending to be a ballerina. All three members of the Crane family are wearing ties this week. All of them wear one tie, and all of them are new. Frasier's tie is the least interesting. It's a fairly generic design, and doesn't add much to what we've seen him wear before. Martin's wearing a tie for only the sixth time in the series, and this is the fourth time if we exclude bow ties. And Niles is wearing his second chicken tie. I'm really liking these chicken ties, as I find them kind of out of character for Niles, and the fact that he has not one but two different chicken ties makes it feel even more out of place, but makes me like it even more. In some ways, this is the episode I wanted out of the one where Lilith came back. Yes, it made sense for the first Lilith outing to resolve their divorce, especially considering they were still kind of together at the end of Cheers, but this actually gets us to the next step beyond that. Granted, it gives us a lot more growth for Lilith than it does Frasier, but being a title character, it allows only so much growth on a weekly sitcom before it would change the show too much. Grammer, Williams, and Newworth are all three stars this week, and all of them are acting at the top of their game. The chemistry between the three is fantastic, and even with the slightly shorter screen time for Newworth than I would have preferred, the performances are all excellent. Outside of these three, no one had a whole lot to do this week, but that's going to happen with this kind of episode. And it's exactly the same thing that happened during the episode where Lilith came back. With that said, Martin's reaction to Lilith getting remarried to someone who isn't Frasier is the highlight of the episode and makes everyone else's inclusion worthwhile. Finally, the surprise cameo at the end is shocking and delightful. Coupling it with the fact that it was kept secret from the executives just makes it all that much cooler. This episode feels like a brief recap before we continue with Frasier's love life beyond Lilith, and is a solid 9.5 out of 10. And an even better time than the last Lilith episode.